Today, I'd like us to talk about oneness or unity. In Swahili, that's Umoja. The word Umoja means one, and when you add the U as a prefix, it becomes oneness. I'm thinking about oneness not just as a unit here, but mostly as Isolele, the chosen ones. How can we exercise unity as we are in this very interesting time? Let's look into it. So we're going to look at some scriptures that talk about our unity, or that talk about how peoples were united in the past. So here I have the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37. I think this is one of Mama Royal daughter's favorite chapters. And it says, let me see here. Oops. Okay, so it says, the word of Zambi came again unto me, saying, moreover, you son of man, take thee one stick, and this is Ezekiel writing this, and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Isolele, his companions. Then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Isolele, his companions, and join them one to another into one stick, and they shall become one in your hand. And when the children of thy people shall speak unto you, saying, will you not show us what you mean by this? Say unto them, thus says Zambi, behold, I, Zambi, will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim and the tribes of Isolele, his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. And the sticks where it was written shall be in your hand before their eyes. And the stick whereon you write shall be in your hand before their eyes. And say unto them, thus said Zambi, behold, I will take the children of Isolele from among the heathen, whether they be gone, where they're gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Isolele, and one king shall be king to them, and all they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will save them out of all their dwelling places, wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them, so they shall be my people, and I will be their God. And David, my servant, shall be king over them, and all shall have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob, my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt, and they shall dwell therein, even they and their children, and their children's children forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Yes, I will be the Nzambi, and they shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, Nzambi, do sanctify Isolele, when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forevermore. Let me point out why I highlighted the things I highlighted. So we have Judah and Joseph over there on the left, verse 16. And this two, you can call them nations or kingdoms, were going to be brought together by the Most High. He said, I, in verse 19, will take the stick of Joseph and the stick of Judah, and I'll make them one stick. I want to emphasize that it is Nzambi that is doing this. We are just pieces of a chessboard, but he is the one taking the actions, making the moves. And they shall be one in his hand. I was thinking about this and I started digging a little bit, and I asked myself, why is it that they split and became two? If any of you have researched a little bit or know about the kingdom of the two kingdoms that were split, the northern and the southern kingdom of Israel, you realize that they were split because some started worshiping other gods. They moved away from Nzambi. And that's how they ended up becoming two kingdoms and things like that. And then they got scattered to the heathens, or they were among the heathens, those that were not worshiping Nzambi. But he says he would gather them on every side and bring them into their own land, and they would make them one nation. They shall no longer be two nations, but one, or one kingdom. Now, then, of course, he says, they shall be my people, which is a theme that we see, he says, even before to the nation of Israel, when they're getting out of, or the nation of Israel when they're leaving Egypt. But something caught my eye when I got here, where he says, and David, my servant, shall be king over them. I had to jump in and research and find out who came first, David or Ezekiel. And I found that David was here on earth around 1020 BC, or years before the Common Era. So people say before Christ. But Ezekiel came later, just about 500 to 600 or 620 BC. So why is Ezekiel saying that David shall be king over them, and David has already died and gone to be with our forefathers? But then when I read on, and then it said, and my servant David shall be their prince forever. Now it made sense that this was not a direct reference to David, but Isaiah, the seed of David, who was the seed of David. So we see Nzambi uniting his people under Isaiah to rule over them or to govern them. But we also see Nzambi keeping the rituals, the rites, the statutes, the laws, to observe those. Those were the ways of worship, ways of serving the Most High that are still being maintained. So Nzambi is uniting Isolele by observance of the laws, the statutes, the judgments, and by recognizing and accepting Isaiah as their king over them. And uniting, of course, those two kingdoms. But we also see that Nzambi says he will set his sanctuary and his tabernacle amongst his people. I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. I will be their Nzambi, and they shall be my people. And then what will happen? The heathen, the non-Isolele, will know the Nzambi. When he does all this, the heathen will know for sure that Nzambi, is the one who sets us apart, when his sanctuary shall be in our midst forevermore. Let me go to another one. Oops. Oh, I think I put a duplicate slide. Okay. And please make notes of whatever thoughts you have, questions, comments. We'll get into the discussion soon about those. Now, I've also looked at another instance where there is unity or oneness displayed. This is in Genesis 11, the story of the Tower of Babel. Some of you might remember it. And the whole earth was one of one language and of one speech. The moment I saw those two statements, language and speech, I said, what is the difference? I went on reading, and then here it says, and Nzambi said, behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they begin to do, and nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Okay? I think they've made a statement here in verse 14, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad. So they're doing this for their own gain. They want to make themselves famous or whatever it is. But Nzambi says, no, I'm going to go down and I'm going to confound their language. So I started looking at what does confound mean and what is this word language? Okay, to confound is to confuse, to mix, to mingle. So Nzambi says, let me do that so that they cannot be one. Let me divide them so that they cannot be one to achieve their evil desire of making a name for themselves. What about this word that is translated as language up here? Okay. Interestingly, yes, it's language, but it's also mixed with speech. But then there were all these words which seem to have some similarity in there. The shore, the bank, I think something like a river bank. This is not about the bank that to keep our money in. You have a brink, you have a brim, the side, the edge, the border. So this was telling me it has something to do with something that is on the edge of something. And this is what Nzambi said when he said he would confound their language. Interestingly, and those of you from Swahili speaking nations or who were born in the motherland and are part of Bantu languages, please make your notes, shed some light on what these words mean. In my culture, I can think of vala, which is the idea of how you separate, for example, when you have corn, it's on the cob, or what we call maize, it's on the cob. And if you're pressing it to separate the seeds of corn from the cob, we use a word that sounds like this, vala. It's vala. It's to separate those. So it was not just confounding. It's really like a process of separating, and you cannot put them back, of course. You cannot put back those seeds on the cob. Then the word sava. That's how we pronounce it in my dialect, which is Kamba. Sava is like to trim. Like if you go find a plant like a tree and you want to trim off some of the branches, you would be removing just the ones that are on the edges. And I think that's where this idea of the edges comes about. So I got the meaning that Nzambi was trimming out these peoples and pulling them away from the main one unit they were part of, and that was how he confounded them. Interestingly, it's dividing, which is the same tactic that a lot of the colonial masters from Europe used on Isolele, on Africans and other parts of the world where they went and divided and conquered them. Which means if we were united, we wouldn't be able to be conquered. All right, let me go to another one here. This is from the New Testament. Many of you are familiar with this, Acts chapter 2. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, these are the apostles or disciples, they were all with one accord in one place. The idea here of one accord is actually the same thing that was in that previous slide here, where it said they were one. It means they were of one mind. Okay, not just that they're speaking one language. They are of one mind, one purpose. So anyway, they were in one accord and in one place. And we know the story. Suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting, and there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues. Okay, now, before I move on, let me explain to you guys that, especially for those of us in diaspora, in Africa, you have what is called your mother tongue. This is the native language of your tribe. Mine is Kamba. Some people may be Maasai. Others may be Luo. You know, different groups, different tribes, they have their tongues that are native to the land and to the people. So now these disciples are speaking with other tongues. I like to believe that they're speaking in other languages, not their mother tongues. I believe that's what it says. As the Spirit gave them utterance. And we're going to see why I'm saying that. And they were dwelling at Jerusalem, Jews. Okay, before I move on, let me explain this word Jews. We have discovered, we've covered this in another video, another session that we had before. And you see the word Jews and Gentiles, for example, used in many cases. The word Jews is describing a subset, some of Israel. It's not describing all of Israel. The word Jew could mean descendants of Judah. It could also mean people who lived in the territory that Judah occupied. Now, the people who lived there, like we saw in another verse some time back, included, for example, Benjamin. So Benjamin would be considered a Jew because he was living in that territory of Judah. So Jews does not refer to all 12 tribes of Israel, but a subset of them, a few of them. Now, why am I bringing this out? Because it says here, they were dwelling at Jerusalem, Jews. That means there were some people from some of the tribes of Israel who were living in Jerusalem. And it says they were devout men. And they were coming from every nation under heaven. So these were people who are dwelling in Jerusalem, but that was not their place of residence. They had actually come from other nations. Okay, they are Jews, they're part of Israel, not all of Israel tribes, but they've been living, they're currently living in Jerusalem, they're dwelling there, but they're from several nations. Now, when this was noised about, the multitude, meaning when this was spread abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded. So these guys from all these different nations, these guys who were some of Israel people, the Jews, they came and they were confounded because every man had them speak in his own language. So I am from a few tribes of Israel, let's say 3 or 4, but I'm hearing these guys, the apostles, each one of them speaking in my own language. And look at what they say. They were all amazed and they marveled, saying one to another, "Behold, are not all of these which speak Galileans?" So they are marveling because they expect Galileans to be speaking their mother tongue or their tribe within the Galilean people and within that region of Galilee. They are marveling because these guys are speaking, the apostles are speaking the other tongues of the other Jews. They even say, how hear we every man in our own tongue? How come I'm hearing somebody speaking to me in my, let's say, if I'm from Kenya and I was one of these Jews and I'm a Bantu, and I hear them speaking, and I know these guys are from South Africa. I know they are Zulu speakers, but now they're speaking to me in Kamba. Okay? And where were these people from all these nations? Where were they residing before they came to Jerusalem? And were given Parthians, Medes, Elamites. These are all the different territories they were coming from. I think I counted maybe 14 or 15 of them. And so they wonder, what means this? Okay? My whole point in this, I know I've dwelt on the difference between the Jews and the Jews and the non-Jews and all that. But my main point here is that all this happened because they were in one accord. They were one of mind and spirit. All right. Why did I talk about this topic why am I talking about oneness or unity? I believe we are experiencing what I call the fullness of the Gentiles. This verse here from Romans says, "For I would not, brethren," this is Paul, I believe, speaking. And when he says brethren, he is referring to his fellow Israelites. "I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in." What does that mean? I think it means that until the time of bringing in those who had departed from the ways of Nzambi, there's Gentiles in two parts. We can talk about that later. There's Gentiles, meaning Greeks, who are people from another nation, and those can come into salvation. And then there's Gentiles in a second meaning, which means these were people from Israel who had gone away from the ways of Nzambi. They were worshiping other things or not worshiping anything at all. And those were Gentiles from Israel. And we'll get into the discussion later on. So has this time of the fullness of the Gentiles come in? I believe so. I believe that is why we have this awakening. And that is why now globally, we're getting the realization that we indeed are Isolele, the chosen ones, and not somebody else. And we're getting the realization of all these biblical locations that are actually in Africa and many other things. So that is the fullness of the Gentiles coming in. Here are some token quotes that I picked up this week. Some of you may be aware that the United Nations General Assembly is going on in New York, and several heads of state are making speeches and meetings and things like that. But every head of state gets a chance to address the world, the United Nations Assembly. And I picked up some quotes from some of them, which you can look up later on, that I believe emphasize that this fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Here's one. This guy in the picture here, this gentleman, is the interim president of the nation of Guinea. Guinea is a West African nation. And he made a speech this week that was, in my view, quite awesome. Here are some of the things he said. You can read all of it later on. But let me just highlight what is in bold. He says, "This is the end of an unbalanced, unjust era where we had no say in the matter." Okay, he's talking about the unbalanced economic, political scales and social scales between Africa and the rest of the world, especially the West, what is considered Europe, what is considered the US, and even Eastern countries like China and so on. When he's making a statement here saying, this is the end of it, you can research and look up the full speech if you would. But it's not just one president. It's several of them are speaking in one voice. Here's another one. This is a president of Ghana, another West African state. And he says, this time I'm going to read all of it. "It is time to acknowledge openly that much of Europe and the United States have been built from the vast wealth harvested from the sweat, tears, blood, and horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and the centuries of colonial exploitation." And he goes on and speaks, and then he says, reparations must be paid for the slave trade. I think this is part of the fulfillment of that fullness of the time of the Gentiles. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this book before. It's a book by Sheikh Anta Diop, an African scholar who's gone to be with our ancestors already. But I want to read a quote here that I highlighted in green. He wrote this book in the late 70s, I think 78 or something like that. And he was addressing all the unity that the African nations were trying to achieve. And he was telling them, Black Africa must finally and definitively be started up the slope toward its federal destiny. The African countries in the years ahead, he was talking about today, will be forced progressively to strengthen their organic federal ties while ridding themselves of the remains of those that bind them still to their former mother countries. Those are the colonialists. I think he was basically saying, and I say this based on what I've read so far of the book, he was saying we have to become one. And we have to become one first politically. We have to cede some of our sovereignty as individual territories or nations in Africa and give that authority to either an entity or an individual so as to make political advancement on our behalf, so that that entity or that individual makes the political negotiations, the political advancements with the rest of the world on our behalf, whether it's a council, an individual, doesn't matter. But he was emphasizing this has to happen first politically before you can talk about economic union and so on and so forth. The main point is he was talking about unity. All right, everybody, I think that's it for me for